So how bad is Dehya? Or maybe a better question is, what does Dehya even do? And this is coming from someone who absolutely adores this character. But when I was watching the Genshin Impact 3.5 live stream and I saw this, she can't even land her final hit, dude. He misses. He misses. I'm gonna have to say I was a little let down. So let's talk about Dehya. Base stats. At level 90, she's gonna have just over 15,000 health, 265 attack, as well as 628 defense. The saddest thing here for me, though, is that Dehya's gonna have an Ascension scaling stat of HP percent. I mean, just look at Yelan and how well that crit chance bonus does for her. So the health percent scaling stat is a little bit of a letdown from me. Now, her normal attack string isn't anything special, and a lot of the time when you're using Dehya, you won't be using it. And as we saw in the video, she does have a very sizable amount of knockback on her normal attack string, so much so that she can't even hit the enemy from her own attack string. No, I'm not gonna get over that. But it's her elemental skill, the Molten Inferno, where a lot of her utility lies and where I think Dehya's gonna get the most amount of play. So her elemental skill is gonna do a couple of things here. It's gonna provide some offensive utility as well as some defensive utility. The offensive utility is that when you use Molten Inferno, you will make a field area. And this is gonna be called the Fiery Sanctum. If you do damage with other characters in your party, or even Dehya herself inside of the Fiery Sanctum, you're gonna cause an AoE pyro damage eruption. And while the damage scaling on this isn't substantially high, it still is gonna put her in that very unique category of being able to apply pyro off the field, which is gonna be sweet. And I already see some burning melt Ganyu teams or just straight up melt Ganyu teams using this skill to keep your Ganyu safe and also doing reverse melt. And that's the offensive utility for her elemental skill, Molten Inferno. It does have two defensive uses though. While one of your allies who's inside of your own field is damaged by an enemy, it's going to take some of that damage and put it on Dehya, effectively reducing the damage that your ally takes and transferring it to Dehya, who is going to have the ability to self-heal some of that damage, although we'll talk about that in a minute. But the other thing that this skill is going to do for you is it's also going to reduce your interruption rate. And honestly, resistance to interruption rate is one of the craziest things to have access to in Genshin. It's why shields are so easy to play with, because you'll take damage and you just won't go anywhere. You're not going to get knocked off cliffs. You're not going to get thrown around by hilly churls and milly churls everywhere. And if this skill can do that, and you're gonna have to be very careful what teams you're gonna put your Dehya in, even though there are some awesome Dendro teams that we'll talk about later in the video. Dendro applications with Pyro, a lot of those reactions self-damage you too, which will also feed back into your Dehya. So with only one way to heal her in some team compositions you might be thinking about, your Dehya could be on the ground more than alive. But this skill has all of that utility packed into it, and I think it's gonna be her best skill. Even though it's the one that almost no one seems to be talking about, everyone wants to use her elemental burst, which is gonna be Leonine Bite. Now this thing is awesome. It has a 70 energy cost and it has an 18-second cooldown, which is massive considering that it only lasts for 4 seconds. So when you activate her elemental burst, you're gonna go into a state of where you just auto attack, you're gonna going to pyro infuse and do a bunch of damage. You can't do normal and elemental skills during the duration of this 4-second elemental burst, but what you can do is use a skill called Roaring Barrage. And Roaring Barrage is gonna be a skill you're gonna wanna try to time Renzo Keikulin style from Final Fantasy VIII, where you're gonna wanna use the Roaring Barrage skill about 0.4 seconds after a Flame Main's Fist strike to speed up the next Flame Main's Fist. Now the one downside to the Leonine Bite as a hyper carry build for Dehya, well, there's a couple of them. First, it only has that 4-second duration, and on top of that, the ability for this, you're not really doing normal attacks or charge attack. It's just something that kind of happens automatically. A lot of these things that require you to do an attack or for it to be a specific type of attack aren't going to work well with Leonine Bite. And as far as Fiery Sanctum goes, there are 2 more things you need to know about it. It does have a 12-second duration attached to the 20-second cooldown on your elemental skill. That's not the only way you have to place it. If for whatever reason you already have a Fiery Sanctum down and you use your elemental skill again, it will move it to a new location, but it will inherit the remaining duration. It won't refresh it to a fresh 12-second Fiery Sanctum. The same is also true with her Elemental Burst. If you use her Elemental Burst and you already have a Fiery Sanctum down, she will automatically pick it up and drop it back down to where you currently are as you activate the burst. And being able to move this field either with her Elemental Skill or her Elemental Burst is actually pretty big, because it's going to allow you to move it to where new enemies spawn in the Abyss, or move it to another group of enemies out in the open world, allowing you to keep that Pyro application up from that field so you can maintain the usefulness that Dehya has in your party. But away from the base abilities only, let's get into the Ascensions. The first one here is going to be Unstinting Sucker. Now, when you move that field using either her Elemental Skill or her Elemental Burst, she's going to take 60% less damage from her passive Redmane's Blood. That's the passive that's going to take damage when your ally takes damage inside of her field and transfer it back over to Dehya. This is going to help her survivability a little bit, and it is going to keep her from, well, face planting. But on top of that, when you use Molten Inferno, the Elemental Skill, she's going to give a super buff called the Gold Forged Form to all your allies, which is going to further increase your resistance to interruption when you're in the Fiery Sanctum field. Now her second Ascension here is going to be called Stalwart and True. Now this is going to help that self-survivability we talked about, and she's going to instantly heal 20% of her max health and then an additional 6% of her max health every 2 seconds or 10 seconds. This is going to have a 20-second cooldown. Now the 20-second cooldown on this, I wish it was a little bit lower, and this can be a little bit of annoying Dehya taking damage, even though she has some self-healing if you're using a healer that only heals your on-field character, because well, with Dehya in your party, you're always having two characters take damage, the one that's on the field actually getting hit, and then Dehya in the background absorbing a portion of that damage. And while it's not the end of the world, it is something you're gonna have to think about when making teams with Dehya in, especially if you're involving the Dendro element, as you like to burgeon and burn yourself for all eternity in the Dehya party. Now her last passive here is the Sunlit Way. This is going to be just like Rosaria's passive, but instead of running faster at dark time, you're gonna run faster during the daytime. Yeah, I said dark time instead of nighttime. So a general overview of her entire Constellation Zero kit. Strong thing, she's going to be able to apply Pyro in an AoE every 2.5 seconds while off the field. She also gives you interruption rate resistance, which is nice. And then she also does have that thing that reduces damage whoever is your active character. And then in addition to that, she's going to be able to do some nice damage while on the field for Leonine Bite during that short 4-second window, which is going to slot her very solidly into the support damage dealer category. And all of this utility is tied pretty tightly to her Fiery Sanctum, which she does have the ability to move. Downsides, if you don't have a healer, the damage that she takes might be too much for certain scenarios and certain bosses, because while she does have some self HP healing, and that just might not be enough for a lot of the teams that you're using her with. And while she can do some nice damage with her elemental burst, it's only available once every 18 seconds. So if you want to build a hyper carry Dehya, there's not going to be a lot of a window of opportunity for this elemental burst. And also there's not a ton of great supports to make her specifically the sole hyper carry of a team for you. Xingqiu and Yelan don't work super well with her elemental burst. And that last point's going to lead into this one as we talk about weapons. Certain weapons are also going to need certain specific types of damage or certain specific types of attack. Like the Redhorn Stone Thresher here is going to buff up your damage of your normal in charge attacks by a flat amount, equivalent to 40% of your defense, just like Yunji. This isn't going to work for a Dehya hyper carry because, well, when you're doing your elemental burst, you're not actually doing what this weapon requires of you. It's not a normal or charge attack. And the Beacon of the Reed Sea here, which is going to be Dehya's event banner wish weapon, sort of showcases exactly how wild her kit can be and maybe a little bit of harebrained at times. It does have pretty nice stats, 608 base stack with 33.1 crit rate. That's really high. But the weapon itself is going to be buffing up your attack when you do elemental skills or if you take damage, which is also part of Dehya's kit. And on top of that, it also is going to give you an HP increase if you're not shielded. The Beacon's pretty good. It does buff up every aspect of her kit. So if you're a big Dehya fan, you want to be super flexible with her, I'd definitely try to pick it up if you're one of those weapon banner people. You know what kind of people I'm talking about. The ones that aren't scared like me. Now, Dehya does have some pretty awesome 4-star options. We have the Good Fish Boy, Luxurious Sea Lord, as well as the Akumaru, which are going to buff up a lot of your elemental burst damage, which both, while being pretty easy to access as 4-star weapons, also have a refinement ability that buffs up specifically elemental burst damage. So if you want to get the most out of Dehya's burst as a 4-star weapon, you can definitely use these. The Serpent Spine also has a very awesome refinement ability where you can get up to 50% damage bonus to everything you do. Normal attacks, charge attacks, elemental skills, elemental burst damage, all of that stuff is buffed up. It also has crit chance on it as well, so it's a fantastic weapon, except that you lose stacks every time you take damage, and with Dehya, well, if someone's in your field, they take damage. If the stacks for this weapon fall off while Dehya's off the field, that's going to be a very sad day. And if you're just trying to make her a traditional damage dealer character, she's also going to have some solid backup 4-star options as well, like the Blackcliff Slasher, Lithic Blade. You've seen these weapons before, and guess what? They're pretty good for a character that scales off of attack still, even in 2023. You might also try out some interesting builds later on with something like the Nagamasa, which is going to help your energy recharge rate. Even though it is a very lengthy 18-second cooldown, you still need to get the 70 energy, and some parties are going to have Dehya as their only pyro character. And then maybe later on, you're going to try her in a burning or burgeoning team, and you want her to be the detonator for your team when she's in her elemental burst form, so you can stack some elemental mastery, maybe use something like the Rain Slasher or the Forest Regalia as a support. She's got some decent options there, but nothing super striking. Really, the only weapon that covers every aspect of her kit is going to be her own unique weapon, the Beacon of the Reed Sea. Dehya's also going to have some interesting artifact options because there's a couple of different teams you can try her out in. If you're doing a mono pyro team, a Lava Walker's there for you. If you're trying to do some sort of elemental reaction sort of burst team with Dehya and Crimson Witch of the Flames to to buff up the power damage as well as your reaction damage. But the most impactful artifact set that I can see for her is going to be Emblem of Severed Fate. This is going to work very well on a lot of different teams. It gives you some energy recharge, which she so desperately needs on that 70 cost burst. But on top of that, it does give you that elemental burst damage. You're going to be able to get 50% elemental burst damage pretty easily from this set. And if you're trying to earn some weird wonky sort of elemental mastery team compositions with burgeoning and burning later on, you're going to have those sets to try out as well. Now, when you're looking at teams for Dehya, it's going to be very important that you remind yourself that she only applies Pyro every 2.5 seconds when off the field. As you can see, Ganyu here is doing some damage as a reverse melt character, but did you catch exactly what happened? So check this part out. Now, Dehya's going to use her elemental skill and apply Pyro to the enemy, right? She drops the field. It's awesome. Then she's going to swap out to Ganyu. Ganyu is going to start her charge shot here. And as you can see, the enemy's still ablaze. That lets us know, even though we can't see the auras on it right now, that there actually is a Pyro aura here. You might not see this in your gameplay if you have your settings for graphics turned down really low, but every element is going to have something that you can visually see on them that lets you know that they're affected by that element. So this has Pyro element on it right now, no other elements. Ganyu's going to charge shot up here, boom, shoot it, and then she's going to get that nice reverse melt, right? Fire in, boom, reverse melts the charge shot, but what about the bloom? Well, since we haven't activated the proc that's on a 2.5 second cooldown from the field's going to activate and reapply Pyro again, strengthening that aura up. And then the bloom's going to go off from Ganyu's charge shot and also successfully reverse melt, which is sweet. So Ganyu is going to start charging her charge shot again here, and we can see that the enemy still has the Pyro aura on them. But what we know behind the scenes though is that it's not a ton of Pyro aura. It's actually going to be taken off all of the way by the charge shot this time, and we get a very different thing. So she's going to charge shot here, boom, throw it in and get that nice reverse melt. But now you can see the Pyro aura is gone, and on top of that, we did not activate Dehya's field yet, and that's because it's got a 2.5 second cooldown. You're going to have to time your shots to correctly do this. Otherwise, what's going to happen is what happens here in this video. You're going to reverse melt your second Ganyu charge shot, and then the bloom effect from the charge shot is going to come out, and that is going to trigger the actual real melt by making Dehya's elemental skill melt the target instead of your bloom from Ganyu, because as you can see, it had a little bit of Pyro aura, charge shot took it off, bloom put on a ton of cryo aura, and then Dehya's skill procced and actually straight up melted it off, and there is no more aura on this enemy. So while it's going to be a very viable strategy to have her in certain dendro related reaction teams or reverse melt related reaction teams, you're going to want to really take note of that 2.5 second cooldown for some of these teams so you get the proper reactions and interactions that you want from your Dehya. Now, Dehya has a lot of cool teams already. Some of them are actually some old teams, so Hu Tao teams actually can use Dehya pretty well. You can throw her in with Hu Tao if you don't like using a shielder. Dehya's got that self-heal capability. Hu Tao's got that self-heal capability. And if you throw her and both of them into a double hydro team, you're going to have some extra healing from Xingqiu as well, which might keep both of them up pretty good to go. Also, Dehya's going to prevent Hu Tao from getting slammed all over the place because of that resistance interruption increase. You can also sub out one of these hydro characters and throw in an animo character such as Kazuha or Sucrose and go back to the old Hu Tao days where you had someone as an animo character with their Viridescent Venerer set. The problem with that team was it was very difficult to find another Pyro character that you wanted to swirl. So Dehya can do what she did before with the double hydro teams protecting your Hu Tao, but also is a source of off-field Pyro damage for your Kazuha or your Sucrose to swirl off of, making your Hu Tao do even more damage. We briefly talked about the Melt Ganyu teams. That's a team as well, and there's a couple different versions. You have Dehya, Ganyu, Kazuha, and Bennett. You also have Dehya, Ganyu, Xingling, and Bennett, and then there's the Melt Burning Ganyu team, which is Ganyu, Dehya, Bennett, and Nahida. And all of these teams we've mentioned so far, Dehya doesn't really offer a lot of damage bonus. She's acting more as the support role instead of the hyper carry sub DPS role. If you're interested in teams that do a lot of damage with your Dehya in conjunction with other teams, we'll look at nothing better than the Mono Pyro team. Well, it's not technically Mono Pyro. We have to put an animal character in there, right? So you have Dehya, Xingling, Bennett, and Kazuha. You also have Dehya, Yoimiya, Kazuha, and Bennett. Both of these teams offer up way more damage for your Dehya. Both your Bennett and your Kazuha and your Xingling, all three of them can buff up the damage that you're doing with your Dehya during her elemental burst. Other interesting options are some international teams with Dehya, Xingling, Child, and Bennett, as well as the hard Ayaka carry with Dehya, Ayaka, Rosaria, and Bennett, which really mix in on that melt, reverse melt relationship of Pyro and Cryo characters with Dehya in them. And I think that's really going to be where she settles. She's going to be in this interesting area where you're going to bounce her back and forth between strictly support or support DPS, and it's going to be very difficult to put her in that hyper carry role. And this doesn't mean she can't do good things and be strong in your team teams in Genshin Impact. She might not be the best character ever, but she definitely has a place, just not so much as a hyper carry or as a support or a support damage dealer. If you guys want to see more stuff, make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.